supposed to start now, like at 2:30, but we're just troubleshooting a bit. So you come back in whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. We just got online. We had to troubleshoot a little bit. So if you can hear us, just let me know. If you can't hear us, also let me know. We have a new microphone that we're testing. So if it's too loud, I apologize. I tried to turn down the volume on my computer. Let us know in the notes in the right-hand side if it is too loud, though, and I'll try and turn it down a little bit more. Okay, so we're just waiting for a couple people to come in, and then we'll go ahead and start.
I'm gonna wait for people to come back.
Yeah, she's coming back.
Yeah, she's going to the washroom.
Okay. Want me to do here?
Oh, over here.
Oh, you didn't set up.
We are just bringing up our slideshow again in the background, and we will. Oh, I have to go do my password. And then you have to set the. It's funny because it was up there that whole time. Is that all I have to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I think we can go ahead maybe, and our people can sneak back in.
Okay, so welcome. Good afternoon. This is, I think, Robin and I's first time of presenting at a high school. So we are at St. Pete's today in Orleans. And we're going to be talking about, I can tell that we are going to be friends. And if anyone is like me and loves the White Stripes, you'll have that song in your head for the rest of the day.
So I'm Robin Bertrand, and this is Sarah Prince. We're both behavior analysts on the ABA team, your Special Education Student Services Department. As Sarah mentioned, we're here from St. Pete's, so shout out to the St. Pete's team for setting us up with this wonderful place to cast from, and a couple people are joining us for our webinar live. I can tell that we're going to be friends already. We're going to talk about social skills today, but we're going to talk about social skills from a unique perspective that applied behavior analysis offers, which gives us a lens into how to develop and treat social skills deficits in a positive way. So without further ado, we'll get started. Are you going to do the little...
So we have a little remote, so I'm being very techie right now. There we go.
So hopefully you can see our slideshow. We're trying to stay out of your way. It looks okay to us when we're watching ourselves. This is just a little bit of overview of our agenda this afternoon. We're going to start off by talking about social skills, a little bit of review of what social skills are, and why they are a priority in everyone's life. Then, as I mentioned, we're going to flip into our unique ABA perspective. So we'll talk about the contingencies, the ABCs that we always return to when we're talking about applied behavior analysis, and how we use that ABC contingencies to be detectives and figure out when there are missing social skills, leading us on into some strategies on how we might target those social skills in a way that would benefit our students. So what do we mean by social skills? Social skills are the way that we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis. As human beings, we're social creatures, and we spend a lot of our time interacting with each other. Social skills can include verbal behavior. So for example, the way that we talk to each other, but not just the words that we say, but the specific words that we select, the tone of voice that we use, the eye contact we make, the volume, the intonation that we have, all of that communicates a message. Furthermore, it's not just what we're saying in our verbal behavior, but it's our nonverbal behavior as well. The actions that we use, the gestures, how close we stand to each other, whether we make eye contact with each other, the pauses that we make in our conversations. Sometimes social skills are referred to as the hidden curriculum, and that's because we have lots of rules and customs in our social behavior that we are expected to know and expected to follow on a day-to-day basis. But most of those rules and customs are never explicitly taught to us or even identified. So they're as important as other skills that we carefully develop on our curriculums at school, but they're not laid out in sort of that step-by-step way.
And I'll give you an example, actually. And there's 4 females here right now, but I'll give a male example because it would be unusual for us. If you go into a male washroom and there's one male and there's 5 urinals and one male is at that last urinal, you know that you're not going to that 4th urinal, right? It's just a hidden social curriculum that you're going to go to the other one at the farthest side. Nobody teaches us that though, right? And so that's kind of that hidden social curriculum that we're talking about.
I'll give a few examples. Could you flip to the next
Yes,
slide? So these are some examples of social skills, greetings, manners, if we say please and thank you, if we wait for somebody else to have a turn to talk, how to start a conversation with others, when to laugh at a joke, when to tell a joke. All of these things are on the hidden curricula. So you can see a few more examples, and these are only minimal examples of all of the different customs that exist. I was thinking of one example, and an example that's not on this list actually is privacy. I don't know if anybody listens to the radio show. It's called Brooke and Jubal in the Morning. It's on 106.9. I'm like plugging them right now. But they're jokesters. And every week in the morning, they do an update. I think it's on Tuesdays, and it's called the Second Date Update. The Second Date Update is if you go out on a date with somebody and you think it goes well, but that person ends up not calling you back and you don't know why, you can call into the radio station. And the radio station will call the person on the air and sort of try to get to the bottom of why that person's not calling back. So one of them that I listened to recently, the guy had gone on a date with his neighbor. So his across the way neighbor, and they had just met and gone on a date, and he thought it had gone really well. But then she wasn't calling him back. She wasn't texting him back. And she closed the curtains on her window. So remember, they're neighbors. So the curtains are closed. So he's like, something's gone wrong, and I really don't know what. So to me, this show is kind of like an experiment in social skills, right? And it's like often there's something that has gone wrong. In this particular example, the gentleman had admitted or said something in the conversation at the dinner table saying, I think it's so cute how you rock out when you're vacuuming. Right? So he thought like he was complimenting her on how cute she was. But meanwhile, that had impeded her sense of privacy. So they were like neighbors that their front windows faced each other. So all of a sudden she was creeped out that this guy's checking in on her. And customary, we don't peek in other people's windows. And then I wondered to myself if he could have got away with it if he had said it a different way. Right? And there's a whole bunch more social skills. It's not just what you say, but it's the way that you say it. So if he had said, I was walking by one day and I caught you rocking out to your vacuum cleaner, that would be different than how I love the way you always rock out with your vacuum cleaner. So that just brought to mind, and you know what, there's so many examples in that radio show. That's just one. So his date went wrong. And I don't think he got a second date.
And now they're neighbors.
And now they're neighbors, and her windows are closed, or her curtains are closed. Another one that I thought of, and it just makes me think how tricky social skills are sometimes to navigate. How many of you get on your social media funny little clips of things? And has anybody seen the one where, well, there's probably dozens of them, somebody's falling on the ice? Have you seen any like that?
Some, I can imagine.
My favorite one is like the guy has a slanted driveway. And he's trying to bring his garbage up the driveway, but every time he walks up, he's sliding back down every time. It's hilarious. And we share it with each other and we laugh. And it's got a bunch of hits on social media because I think people appreciate the humor in it. But then I thought to myself, what rules are there around whether or not somebody's falling on the ice is actually funny? In that case, the person was not hurt, and somebody posted it. So you would hope that somebody agreed to have it posted, and it was very funny. But if you don't have the perspective of the other person in mind, and that other person gets hurt or is upset that they fell, then that's not an appropriate time to laugh. So judging the perspective of another when that accident happens really determines whether or not it's funny.
And I was in a high school on Tuesday and giving another presentation. Oh, sorry. And it really is in elementary, there is hidden curriculum, right? But then you step in the door of the high school and there is just so much hidden curriculum in a high school and so much gray area that you're exposed to. So that jump from grade 6 to grade 7 is like it's a lesson in the hidden social skills and those advanced social skills that you have to pick up so quickly in order to kind of fit in the high school setting.
Absolutely. So flip
switch?
one ahead. Yep. So why are social skills important? We've touched on it because we just acknowledged that if you're missing social skills, you might not get that second date. You might laugh at the wrong person who's fallen on the ice. But social skills are also crucial for big events in your life, like making and keeping friendships. They can also help you be successful in your school life and in your career, because often we're asked to work alongside people in a cooperative or collaborative way. And without those social skills, it can be really difficult to work in partnerships. And without working in partnerships, it can be really hard to further your career, whether that's going to a job interview or showing that you can be productive in all of those aspects of, say, customer service or teamwork. So they're very crucial in the success of our goals in life. So having good social skills can help us have more, better, lasting relationships. And some studies show that relationships, if you have at least one or two friends, that having those friendships can buffer the impact of stressful life events. And that rings true for us when we have a bad day and we might call a friend or our spouse, or, you know, if something tragic happens in life, we reach out to those people closest to us because of those buffer that it has of being in a community. It's also been shown that there's a correlation between social skills and increased independence and self-esteem, and then an opposite, a negative correlation between having friendships and depression and anxiety. So there's a protective factor with social skills and with friendships. And if you're a parent, the thing that we're going to hear most often from parents is, I just want my son or my daughter to be happy and to have friends. So it's very important to us as human beings to be able to interact and develop at least a couple close friendships. And what we're hoping to be able to bring to you today is some tools to help support our students in gaining those skills.
And I often get a lot of comments from parents of, my son only has one friend at school. Like, I'd like him to have more. I'm like, but how close are they with that one friend? Are they really close? Great. They may be getting all those social opportunities that they need out of that one friend, and that one friend will follow them through life. So even just having that one friend continues to expose you to all those different things. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So moving on into our lens of how we bring applied behavior analysis into social skills. And I'll pass on to Sarah.
So I'm going to move out of the way a little bit, but I'll stay within the camera. So Robin and I wanted to really try and conceptualize social behavior in an ABA perspective. And by ABA, I mean applied behavior analysis. And so in applied behavior analysis, we don't just look at the behavior, which I need my pointy thing. I have there we go, right here. The B part of it, we look at the entire surrounding of what the behavior is happening. Really, a lot of our interventions focus on the A and the C component and not so much on the B component. So when I say antecedent, I mean anything that's happening before the behavior or immediately before the behavior. So I'm going to give you a pop quiz, right? That could be an antecedent that then links to the behavior of, oh, I don't want to do this, right? That then links to what happened afterwards, which is a consequence. And it doesn't need to be a reprimand as a consequence. It's just anything that happens after they leave the class, right? And so that is kind of what we would call the pathway of behavior, or the ABCs, or I know Jen and Marilyn speak to it as the 3-term contingency. There's always 3 terms within contingency or with a pathway. Oh, no, I have this pointy thing. I need to remember my techiness. So I'm going to expand on that a little bit and talk about those maintaining consequences. So I added to this slide and I said the maintaining consequences. So there's a pop quiz. I said, forget this, and I left. that just kind of worked out for me, right? I didn't have to do the pop quiz. So next time the pop quiz happens, I may do the same thing and then get out of it again. And then what you start to see is this like snowball effect of every time a pop quiz happens, the behavior happens in order to get out of it. And so that's kind of where we bring in that reinforcement cycle. And so it's really easy to see the reinforcement cycle with the challenging behaviors, right? Maybe less easy to see with those appropriate social behaviors. So we're going to kind of break it down into some of those social behaviors as well. So let's chat about joining a conversation. Joining a conversation is almost one of the first social skills I teach when it comes to advanced social skills. So if you can't get into a conversation, you can't maintain it, and you can't continue the conversation and experience more social interaction. So you're going to stay in close proximity to someone and they're talking about spring break. Let's say they're going to Florida, right? So that's the antecedent. That's kind of a signal to you that, oh, I could probably join this conversation. The behavior is I'm going to wait for a pause and then I'm going to trade information. So they kind of have a pause in their communication and then you're like, is it Hollywood Studios in Florida? And then that opens up the door to find common interest and join the conversation, which that joining the conversation and being part of that social interaction could be reinforcing in itself to continue to do that in the next part when you see two people converse. And so that can go on of, yeah, you're right. Hollywood Studios is there. I think Harry Potter ride is there. Oh, I love Harry Potter ride. And then that just snowballs into an amazing cycle of reinforcement in those social interactions. Any questions on that? No? Yeah, go ahead. Never pauses. And so that's kind of a social behavior, an inappropriate social behavior that we would have to work on. Yeah. I would like them to join a conversation before I work on them pausing when they're trading that information, right? And that you're saying looks like, isn't Hollywood Studios? Oh, Harry Potter's there. I love Harry Potter. I went on Harry Potter and then they just continue, right? That's right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that is a skill in itself, right? And that would be a skill I would probably do in its own strategy, right? So the antecedent, the behavior would be, I just continue to talk. Nobody interrupts my interest, right? So I'm just going to keep continuing to talk.
You don't want to be impolite and intrude or interrupt.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's absolutely where we're going to,
Yeah.
is how do we pinpoint those things when they're kind of breaking down or going wrong? And then what do we do when we find out where that breakdown's happening? That's kind of where we're going next
Yeah.
too.
And so another kind of social behavior is that good sportsmanship, right? In those competitive kind of natures. So in this case, there is a setback that happened in a competitive game. So let's say two individuals were playing cards at lunchtime and he was about to win, but didn't get the cards that he wanted. And so it goes into the behavior of acknowledging the setback and offering congratulations, right? So, oh man, or a colorful language sometimes that you may hear in the high school. I was so close to winning. Okay, it's fine. We can still go, right? And so good job, man. Good job for laying that card. And then that goes into that positive social interaction and that continued play. So I did that appropriate social behavior. My peer was okay with it. The peer could respond, yeah, I was holding on to that card for a while. I knew it was going to destroy you, right? Let's keep going. This is really fun. And so they just continue in that cycle. And so you get that positive interaction. When I said, oh man, rather than forget this, I'm not playing anymore. And so that's kind of the good sportsmanship. Anyone have a good sportsmanship little student or big student? No. And I'm going to pass this up to you.
Sure. So as you mentioned, not everyone has polished, perfect social skills. Certainly characteristics of some people with developmental disabilities and of autism, core characteristics of those disabilities can be poor communication and social skills. But by no means is it just people that have a diagnosis that sometimes shows poor social skills. As Sarah mentioned, just when you think you have good social skills, you get contact with new environments where you have to learn new ones all of a sudden. You mentioned graduating from elementary to high school. And then there's, sort of hitting puberty and when people start showing interest in relationships with other people, romantic relationships and dating. And there's all of those new sets of rules. if you ever go traveling or you meet people that are from a different culture, learning about their social customs and rules. So I think that we're always learning and going into new social situations and trying to keep up. Social media, right? For social media, that's something that's just kind of come out of, I want to say out of nowhere, but just come really fast, right? So
don't type your tweet with all capital letters because it looks
stop
like you're
shouting
angry.
at me, right? So there's so many rules that we're always trying to navigate. And yes, lots of people have a hard time with those social rules. We already mentioned that having those strong social skills can be protective, and the reverse of that is true too. So if you have poor social skills, it's harder to find jobs, harder to make friendships, more likely for you to get depressed, have anxiety, or demonstrate problem behavior. So what we do have, though, is ABA strategies that can help us. So we'll move on forward a little bit from there. Sometimes we have students that show that they don't have a lot of motivation for social interaction. So these are students that might spend more time on their own and seem like they might be happy to spend more time on their own. On their iPods, maybe a bookworm, somebody who likes to do a lot of reading. And there's nothing wrong with having those introverted interests, absolutely. But people who don't have a lot of motivation for social interaction may have not had a lot of positive experiences with social interaction, like the snowball cycle that Sarah mentioned. That might be because they just have never tried or never sort of had that contact. The trouble with that is if there's no contact, then there's not a lot of opportunity to be learning those social skills through those responses. And sometimes the responses are when you have a positive social interaction and you also learn from your mistakes. But if you're not having those interactions, you're not learning. So sometimes the gap can widen if even those people with less interest are not supported with social skills development. We also have people that look like they might not be super motivated for social attention, but they've given up. And they may have given up because they have a history of not having great social interactions. And we also have a category of people who may show problem behavior because they're trying to access social interaction in a different way.
Yeah, and I may go back actually and just kind of touch on where that goes wrong. If there was a setback in a competitive game and I did something, but it didn't work out for me. And so what happened is that what I just did kind of just got punished in a little bit of, oh, should I have done that? And then it gets cut off so that next time it happens, well, no, that didn't work out for me last time. So I'm going to do something else. And that something else may start to snowball into those inappropriate behaviors or those challenging behaviors that then get more reinforcement, right? Because it may just be, oh, it ended the game, so that worked out better than me continuing the game. And then I'm going to bring it back to your comment of I'm just continuing to trade information. I'm not going to wait for a pause. It may be that when I waited for a pause and I traded information and then nobody took my common interest, right? And so then I didn't really join the conversation. And so next time they learn that if I continue to talk and just continue to talk, nobody can interrupt me and they're listening to me, right? But it may not be like that. And so that can kind of snowball in that effect as well. Let's acknowledge what you say and then continue to go. So, and that may have punished that appropriate behavior of just saying one sentence of trading information rather than one comment. So I'll give it back to you. Sorry. Is it the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to sort of pick up on where Sarah was leaving off, if there was an error, so back to that Universal Studios example. So there was an error that happened. Either the person jumped in before there was a break in the conversation, or let's say the person jumped in and started talking about Harry Potter straight away without having that link to it being about Universal Studios. Those peers that were sitting at that cafeteria lunch table may have responded much differently and may have walked away or teased that other student. And two things can happen there. One is the person who initiated that social interaction may not want to do it again because it was punished. And they take less chances in those situations in the future. But number two, those peers may be less likely also to seek out interactions with that student who tried because they also had a negative experience with conversing with that student. So when attempts at social interaction are punished, and if that pattern happens in a snowball type of way, that can lead to students or people avoiding those social situations and seeking out different ways to have fun or different ways to enjoy themselves other than interacting socially with people. So that we call that like escape or avoidance behavior. That can even increase and lead to things like kids skipping classes because they don't want to go to a class that they're sitting beside that student who they had that poor social interaction with, or even skipping school. So that's one type of consequence that doesn't make things so bright in the future. The other thing that we sometimes see is even though those students tried to have those social interactions, that they kind of went sideways, but they keep trying new and different things. And sometimes inappropriate social behaviors are accidentally rewarded or accidentally reinforced because they gain attention from peers or they gain attention from students in different ways.
And did you have a question?
You're nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a good example. I know you do.
That in the 7, 8 classrooms.
Okay.
And what do you see?
Today, for example, when students get to go to the bathroom, so he's putting his hand up a certain way that it looks funny. And then when I say yes, you can go, he glides across the room with this drama. Well, we were having a serious conversation. And so everybody starts laughing. So I punished him. I sent him to the office. Go to the bathroom, yes, and then go to the office. Like, we've had that conversation before. When is it appropriate? When is it not? When is it time to
Yeah.
do it? When is it not? And it's just not registered.
Yeah, and so I'll reiterate it for here as well. As someone asked to go to the washroom, he said yes, go to the washroom during a serious conversation, and they made a dramatic exit out, right? And in turn got other people's attention to take away from that lesson or that serious conversation that you had. And those are exactly what Robin was saying, is that
Yes.
I'm gaining social attention and I'm getting it, but I'm getting it in inappropriate ways. And the more we address it, the more attention we're providing to it, right? And so it may indirectly get into that snowball loop. Yeah.
So how do you cut it off?
That's
Yeah.
So where we're going to go next is our ABA lens for that piece, because when we notice that there's a lagging skill, so part of it is our detective work. We want to use those ABC contingencies. That's our detective work to try and pinpoint the areas where it's going wrong. Okay, so what we can hypothesize from the example that you're providing is that student might really enjoy social attention. And that's one way that they're getting social attention from their peers. What we might want to look at is what other positive ways or appropriate or socially appropriate ways might they have in their repertoire at maybe different times in the day, recess times or breaks in the day, or even what's a way that you can get attention at that time that would be more appropriate and teach that replacement skill. So we're always trying to look for the replacement skill that accesses the same reward. So we take that accidental reinforcement and we're like, ooh, how can we use that power? But how can we use that power to build a skill that's more appropriate? And we hope if we build that more appropriate skill, they'll use that one more often and the inappropriate one less often.
And it's almost like you need a short-term and a long-term strategy, right? And in the short term, I'm just going to teach you to put your hand up and say, hi, miss, thanks for the conversation. Oh, thanks, Johnny. And give them a little bit of attention there. The peers will be like, oh, yeah, Johnny, yeah, this is a good conversation. I'm hypothesizing. That's kind of that short term. Yeah. And then the long term is that skill building.
Okay, so I would say that a third of my classes, it's a third, like if I have 20 students, let's say 7 or 8
Are all doing the same. Yeah.
So
How do I?
how do I reinforce every single one?
Yeah.
It's totally
And that is,
exhausting.
I can only imagine. So they were saying when you have 7 or 8 individuals in your class, all looking for that social attention, how do I do it that way? And I feel like that may even be a different conversation. It could be looking at group reward systems that access that social attention, or little attention breaks that I pause of Johnny, I need to have 5 more minutes of this conversation, then you guys can have an attention break, where they get to do something. And so they have the predictability of, I'm not going to do it in this lesson, but I know in 5 minutes I'll be able to. And those are just little strategies that may or may not work in those situations. Yeah.
So how are we preparing them for high school in the future if we allow them to have little breaks to have their little attention?
And
That's
that's a great question. And so that's why I think you need those short-term and those long-term
That's right.
strategies, right? And those are all the short-term strategies. Eventually that 5 minutes are going to be more 10 minutes of my lesson, and then 1 minute of that attention break, and then 15 minutes of my lesson and 30 seconds, while we start to teach those long-term social skills goals that can then indirectly help us with that. So it's in the moment, because it takes a while to teach those social skills, and it takes, 3 months, it could be even the school year, that you need something in the interim that cuts off that maintaining reinforcer, right? Yeah.
But you're right. It's a skill that as a system, we want to start teaching young, right? So that, because it's not something that comes overnight, and it does require effort and time.
Mhm. Absolutely.
They all do it like that. We're still
Teaching that. Yeah. And that's something that would have been introduced a while, right? Yeah. And it could have been reinforced, or it may not have been reinforced in the past. Yeah.
And when you talk about in the classroom dynamic, where if students are engaging in sort of inappropriate or silly behavior to get social attention from other peers, if students are engaging in sort of inappropriate behavior to get your attention, you can not attend to it, right? You can try to not respond to that. But if you're managing peer attention, there's a lot more variables, right? So you're actually trying to teach 2 things to your classroom. You're trying to teach the other peers not to laugh and respond and make a big deal when that 1 or 2 or 7 people are acting inappropriately. So that's one lesson, is please respond differently. And then the other lesson is for those that are looking for that attention, how do they get that more appropriately? And that's, I liked your idea of the group contingencies, because that's, if you get the students working towards a shared goal, sometimes the peers are the ones that learn first not to laugh, or not to laugh and respond in whatever way they are, because they know that they're not getting any more towards their goal, or they're getting towards their goal faster, right? So they might get rewarded or get closer to their goal if they hold back, which may help the plan as a classroom.
It depends. And so in ABA, we do really focus on those positive strategies rather than the negative. If there is a negative, there always is 10 more positives. Does that make sense? And so we balance it out that way. And I use the positive of, it's that I'm going to tell them what to do, and then I'm going to reinforce them for it. I'm not going to tell them what not to do and then punish them for it. And it's the classic example that you would see in elementary of, Johnny, no running in the halls. Running. All right, here I go.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than Johnny walking. Oh, walking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why I flipped to more of that positive strategy than the negative strategy. And you'll become a broken record, right? And I feel like I'm always a broken record. And sometimes I go back into school, so like, did I not just say that last week to Johnny? Like, and then in June, I'm like, did I not say that last September to Johnny? But that repetitive nature of all that stuff and that access to reinforcement does over time strengthen that behavior.
And even if you are using punishment strategies, or if you're using what we call extinction strategies, so you're trying to break the contingency, the link
That
between
negative attention link.
Yeah, between that accidental reinforcement. It always works better if at the same time you're trying to build the replacement skills. So sometimes punishment used alone, you're maybe punishing that one behavior, and that one behavior might sort of reduce over time, but often it'll get replaced with something else that may also be inappropriate, unless you teach them what else to do instead. And in this example, if we're talking about peer social attention, these are probably students that need to learn some kind of outlet to access peer social attention in a more positive way. Yeah, in the short term and over time. Yeah.
While you work on starting a social interaction appropriately to get those attention.
But I know it takes a lot of patience and a lot of persistence in these
It does.
individual cases.
Yeah.
'Cause I have a young man who definitely is on the work evasion path. Let's do anything I can to get out of this room so I don't have to do what's expected. So we'll get very loud, we'll get very silly, we'll take away from everybody else's work environment. And I said, well, I'm not sending you out because I know that's what you want. So
Right.
I will try to redirect and find something else. And there are small successes. Today we got 2 sentences written in our story, but we got 2 sentences
Yeah.
written in our story.
Yeah, and you're slowly
And
building
there's
up that
praise for
expectation.
that, and I love your
Yeah.
character, and this is great dialogue. And they taught something new and how to save it in the file. And there was praise. And,
Yeah.
and we got 2 sentences.
Mhm.
And that was after 50
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah. And I think you're speaking really well to that maintaining consequence of I'm going to try and access that positive behavior with the reinforcement as much as I can. Sure, there's going to be times where that negative, inappropriate behavior accesses negative attention, but as long as those are few and far between and the positive route is more, you're
When
more
we
like,
started the class on a decibel 5 times higher than anybody else. We weren't sitting down, we weren't accessing the device, we were just everywhere. And within 10 minutes of me settling the others, we just
turn the microphone around.
said, can I go to the bathroom? We just wanted out. We tried for 10 minutes to get everybody's attention. The other kids then settled into work. Can I go to the bathroom? And I said very simply, we're going to negotiate this. So we're going to do some work that I've asked you to do. And if you show me some work, we'll talk about the bathroom. The bathroom got forgotten. It got forgotten
Right.
because in the process of us juggling back character names and getting this, the bathroom was forgotten. We didn't ask again. But it took, like I said, 40 minutes to get
there.
2 sentences to get there. But,
Yeah.
but
Those
it's
are small
persistence and
successes.
patience.
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing I'm wondering about is in real life, like that
Mhm.
neighbor that saw in the window, there were no chances.
Nope.
There were no positive moments where he could have changed his mind. And I think,
Redo.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, so I'm thinking in classroom, are we preparing them for life?
And I
It's
think-
always positive, but some of our choices lead us into a negative consequence, and that teaches us too.
And I think there are some people who will learn sort of through that trial and error a little bit more naturally. But when you see that those traditional approaches are maybe not working over time, and the problems are still continuing, what you might be wondering is if that person is really missing a skill. Like you're mentioning, your student may be really missing some skills in terms of being able to persist through difficult tasks or stay focused for a longer amount of time. And you found a way of making that task smaller with the goal of building, which is maybe a little bit easier to conceptualize with a piece of work. But if we think of that in terms of the social
universe,
skills and the social universe as well, sometimes we need to take a couple steps back so that we can make those smaller steps forward.
I think it's about balance of both. I think we need both.
And I'm going to go into how we can teach some of those and
Yes.
eventually see those practices kind of in play a little bit. I'm also conscious of
Those
time.
are really great examples,
shoot,
though.
Your computer just.
Okay, so let's turn around the snowball. There you go. And I will bring the slideshow back up.
Well, and I wanted to turn it around so that they could hear your questions and we could have a conversation without me reiterating some of those questions. So what Robin was kind of touching at is that the more practice we have, and with the context of us prompting them in the context of reinforcement, we can create a package in itself to kind of teach some of those skills, right? And the package that we use is called behavior skills training. And I'll kind of give a disclaimer. So it really is to teach those advanced social skills. And so a student that I would use this with is someone who has the ability to converse. He may not actually do it, but it is in his repertoire. So I don't need to teach that those words or that ability to say phrases, who has the ability to be able to handle a lengthy lesson or a lengthy instruction. He may not listen to that lengthy instruction but has that ability. And then also has the ability to take a model from someone and be able to imitate it. But also understand that model and change his own behavior, right? So understand that his behavior is different than that model. And that can kind of be massaged a little bit within the behavior skills training, but without those three components, the behavior skills training really isn't as appropriate. And so we did do an early social skills webinar last month that would be more appropriate when you don't have some of those skills, but this one is more for those advanced social skills. Do some of your students follow under those kind of three categories? Yeah, perfect. So behavior skills training really has 4 components. And without those 4 components, it's not actually behavior skills training. So research says that you need all 4 components in order for it to actually work. It starts off with an instruction. It then goes to a model and then goes to just a rehearsal with an individual with feedback coupled into it. And so without those 4, it kind of breaks down. There's been research of, do I really need the model? You'll get a bigger bang for your buck and a quicker learning curve if it's added in there. There's been some as well of, do I really need the feedback component to it? Again, you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck if you have all 4 of them together. The 2 components that were absolutely needed was the instruction and the rehearsal. Without those, no learning was happening. So the other 2 were a little bit of take it or leave it, if you can do it in the moment or not. Did you get it? Oh, thank you. Okay, so this is kind of in behavioral skills training, we usually do it during a rehearsal. And so a rehearsal would be something where I am one-on-one with the individual, maybe for 5 minutes, or if I'm part of his team, I'll come in and we'll do it together for 5 minutes or however long. It starts with, and I'll break it down kind of using the 3-term contingencies. Before I actually get him to do it, I need to go through the instructions, right? Just a little bit of a lesson. The instructions are very simple though. They're no more than 10 steps. Usually I try to make it 1 to 5 steps depending on the individual that I'm talking with. And then immediately after my instructions, I show them the model. So it's fresh in their head. I usually give them a written form of the instructions too, so it kind of lasts a little bit longer. And then I show the model. So the model could be a video, and YouTube has tons of really great teaching social skills videos. I'll show one of them in a little bit. Or I say, hey, Johnny, you sit there. I want you to pretend to be Clara, your friend, and I'm actually gonna pretend to be you. And then I act out what I would like it to look like. After that model, I give some feedback, right? And so that's where that feedback comes in. And what I've learned over the years is that after the model, I'll give 1 to 2 positive feedbacks. Hey, Johnny, you waited for the pause. That was awesome. And you actually traded information related to the topic. That's really great. And then I leave it at that, because what has been found is that if positive feedback is coupled with corrective feedback right after that, all they're hearing is the corrective feedback, right? And so then when you go back into
the crab sandwich,
when you go back into the antecedent, they're remembering what they did wrong and not what they did right. So I leave the positive feedback there and I stop. And then if I want to get in like 5 to 10 rehearsals within that moment, we'll do something for a little bit and then we'll come back. Okay, Johnny, we're going to practice this again. Remember, I want you to talk about something related to the topic. If that was a corrective feedback that I wanted to give him. And so I would give that in the instruction component. I may even just say that is my instruction, because of the first rehearsal that I did, I already went through all of the 10 steps or whatever. I would get a model again, and then we would practice it again. And the rehearsal is really, okay, I'm going to pretend to be Clara, and you're going to pretend to be you, and we're going to try this again. You can do this entire thing until they're able to do it in a very contrived setting with you. And if they're able to do it in a contrived setting with you, it'll hopefully become a default for them when they're in the moment. Does that make sense?
So how would you apply that model to raising your hand and waiting for your turn?
Raising your hand and waiting for your turn. So I would sit them down and I would be like, okay, so when the teacher is talking, the rule is you raise your hand, right? Or we would create some kind of instruction. Yeah.
And wait till the teacher makes it.
And perfect. So that I would list in my instruction component, and I'll be, okay, Johnny, you're going to pretend to be the teacher, and I'm going to pretend to be you. I want you to talk with whatever the teacher's lesson was, right? I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go wait him to call on me. And then, oh, miss, can I go to the washroom? And then I will flip the table around and I will pretend to be the teacher and he'll pretend to be him. And then we'll practice that. I'll give him feedback on how he did. You know what? You kind of shot your hand up right mid-sentence. Maybe wait for a break because that was part of the instructions or something. And we would just fine-tune that skill in the moment just through rehearsals. Usually when I do behavior skills training in a social kind of goal, I do 4 to 5. And by 4 to 5, they've got it. And then we go back into the environment, practice it then. Okay, you're going to go back into Mrs. Smith's class. And then Mrs. right? And so we kind of get that in vivo practice right after that contrived rehearsal trial. And then I'll come back in the next week and it usually looks like the same thing. So it looks like I'm being a broken record. But then when I chat with Miss Smith, you know what, he actually raised his hand once last week. That was great. Right. And so then it starts to be more and more and more.
And the instructions model rehearsal feedback loop happens in that role play situation often as part of our teaching, like the initial teaching, but can also happen in the natural environment. So once he goes back into the classroom, it may be little cues to remind him. So it might be just like a little message on his desk that reminds him of those rules. And it may even just say 1, 2, 3. So nobody else needs to know, but it's a reminder of those instructions for him. And then there may be other kids in the class that are raising their hand, and the teacher may point out that the models in the classroom. So still keep in mind those 4 steps. And then the rehearsal and the feedback when he's doing a great job. And that rehearsal and feedback can be public or private. It may be a cue that you've kind of got on the side with him when he's doing a great job, or something that happens at the end of class where you catch him because he raised his hand that one day in class. So that those 4 steps continue always to loop, but they loop within our mini practice sessions and they loop again as much as possible in the natural environment. So the more people that are on board, your teacher that's coming to practice the remedial piece, but also that link into the classroom and the link home to families as well, can often be very important.
And when things have gone really well, when I've used that is when I have an instruction component that is very systematic and laid out. So teacher is talking, there's a break in her sentence, I raise my hand, I wait for my name to be called, and then I say my comment in 1 to 2 sentences, right? And so when I break that down, on topic. Perfect. There you go. And then you add that in there. And so that is a very clear of this is the breakdown.
It's a recipe.
And so all of your corrective feedback is related to that. And so they go back and, I forgot to wait for the pause in the conversation. And they have that clear kind of back and forth. Without that instruction in written format and really broken down, that's where I see things starting to sway and not work as well. And I'll give you do you have something to say?
Only to bring up that piece about bringing those the feedback back to that recipe is really important. Yes. But also, if you end the feedback like you mentioned on those positives, then it feels like you're on the same side working towards the same goal. Right? It's sort of you can bring back those corrective pieces at the beginning so we can end on a positive that day again, but always finding at least one thing in the recipe that went well at the end of the session is how you kind of keep that rapport going.
That's actually really important too, because if you look at, there's some stuff in behavior in response to athletes in the Olympics, and they found that when they linked the positive feedback to what they did well on whatever move they were making, they're more likely to make that muscle memory connection with that positive rather than that corrective feedback being behind. And so that's in essence what we're kind of doing right afterwards. I want you to remember what this felt like, and then I'll correct you on the other stuff later.
So do you go into classroom for students?
It depends on and we can get into our referral process at the end a little bit. So here's an example of, where's the clicker thingy? Oh, here it is.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So here's an example of joining a conversation. So we would, in essence of what we had chatted about, if you're in close proximity, someone's talking about spring break, I would contrive that spring break conversation, outline the rules, model it with a video, we'll practice it and I'll give positive feedback and then I'll kind of loop it in. And so this is what
The
we've
task analysis, yeah.
done with another student. So this is everything that needed to happen in order to join a conversation. And so all my positive feedback was related to one of these things, and all my corrective feedback was also related to one of those things. And so it really focuses, and all the other universe of stuff that I'm like, oh, I probably should tell him this, don't worry about. It'll all just get naturally built when we follow these things. And so for those on the webinar, it just says, listen to the conversation, watch from a distance, use a prop. So in the video model that I showed, he was using his phone for a little bit as like a distractor. If I'm going to sit down here, but I'm going to have my phone with me. Find a common interest. So they're talking about spring break, and he's like, oh, Hollywood Studios, Harry Potter, maybe I'll try that. Move a little closer to the conversation. Wait for a pause in the conversation. Mention the topic. Oh, is Hollywood Studios in Florida? Trade the information. And then assess their interest, right? And that's sometimes where it does go wrong. So we could kind of figure out some corrective feedback along that point. And then introduce yourself. So isn't Hollywood Studios in Florida? Oh, yeah, I think it is. Oh, hi, I'm Sarah. Yeah, I went there the other day and there was Harry Potter there. And then you can kind of, and so that's the breakdown of my instruction component. I didn't sway from that. There was a really great video already on YouTube that actually I stole that spring break conversation from, that came from there. And then some of our little kiddos who, like, social skills are a really hard skill for them, right? That intrinsic motivation to just have a continued conversation with friends after all the effort that you just did to do all these 10 skills is difficult. So we added a reinforcement component to it, which is just a punch card. So every time I came in and we rehearsed and there was a positive comment afterwards, I would just punch it. And so he may have gotten it immediately after I left or over the course of a couple of weeks every time I came in. And it's really just adding a little bit of a tangible kind of component. Parents were completely on board with this. They would say, sure, if he has 10, we'll just put a thing of toonies in the class and you can just pull a toonie and go for pop or something. And that was kind of what that punch card looked like. How are we doing on time? Oh, I keep using that. I'm not techie related. I keep going right to
We
the.
have 9. Is it timed for exactly an hour? Or are we over?
Yes. Oh, no, you can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes.
Okay. So here's the same thing with the good sportsmanship, and the same kind of flow went. There just wasn't a really great video on YouTube, and I didn't feel like making one. So we just did that. You pretend to be so-and-so, and I'll pretend to be you. And then we flipped it in the rehearsals. And this is kind of what it looked like. So and in this case, I wanted to define what a setback was because I didn't know if he really, truly understood it. And I wanted him to be able to identify what that antecedent was. And so a setback was if someone does a move that puts you at a disadvantage, or an activity is cut off or doesn't go in your preferred way, right? How many times have we seen blowouts based on that? And so when a setback happens, I just gave him 3 things that I wanted him to do. And he could have done one of them, he could have done all 3 of them, but that is what I wanted him to do after a setback happened. So take a deep breath and think about something else, right? So get it out of your head. Review the facts. Oh, it's a card game and there's still a full deck. I haven't lost yet. And then offer congrats and a chance to try again or play again. Oh man, you won again. Okay, we're doing it next time, next lunch, you and I here, right? And so that's kind of what we coached them to do. This is not me, but this is an example of what it could have looked like. And then this check, we kind of did like a check mark system. And for me, I wanted him to do this independently. He was just at that level. He was an older high school student. So 1 check mark each time you do something from this list without me having to remind you, right? Because I didn't want it to be me constantly reminding him what to do. And so if there wasn't a reminder of him doing one of these things, then you got a check mark. If I had a reminder, you just didn't get a check mark. And we would flow through. I mean, you can set up many setbacks when you play cards and when you play board games. So there was a lot of opportunities that we could do there. And I think that's the last slide. So do you guys have any questions or any examples? We kind of worked through a couple.
Just some of the things I'm thinking about.
Turn this around.
I know with the intermediate panel, we have a lot of, they lack in patience and they lack in, that persistence. It's hard and then I want to give up.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about some of my students on the spectrum who they're high functioning.
Yeah.
But their thinking is so linear or rigid that it's very difficult for them to calm and to take that breath. And even if you offer that strategy or you're trying to coach them through that, it can be quite
And that's that
challenging.
perspective taking, and that's part of the spectrum that it's hard to think outside of their own perspective, right? Little things that we could do. So if that's their perspective, I would coach on one other thing, and that would be that one other thing. And once they kind of had that other thing, I would try and generalize it to two things, and I would build in that flexibility a little bit more. So in the case of the setbacks, it started off with every single setback, and no, you did this because of this. And so we're like, okay, so it was mom's turn and then it was my turn. And we kind of built in the flexibility, like it's hard to explain this way of, so you're only going to do the setbacks, mom, and I'm not going to do them. And then I'm also going to do them. And we kind of brought into that way.
My example was just with the binder,
Yeah.
the binder organization. It had
Yeah.
to be a certain way. Because that's what mom and dad expected,
Right.
I guess. And this is what the teachers are trying to reinforce. You put the paper in the rings before you can leave the class. Well, when the rings break, it can be quite a disastrous outcome. And not just break, but all the papers are everywhere. So this student very vocally, can somebody help me? It's like louder
Okay.
and louder.
It's
And
not a
the
bad,
other children are getting ready. They're trying to pack up their things, and no one's really actively stopping to help put
right.
paper in his binder.
Yeah.
So the gentle reminder was, everybody's getting ready. Do your best. It's okay. And we got louder and more frustrated because no one was stopping. And he's sad because he's learned this, but I asked nicely and no one's helping me. So you have to, then you have to adjust. Well, how do I respond to that now? Yes, it's stressing. Yes, you did ask nicely, but you have to realize that all of them are busy doing their own binders. So no one, they can't stop right now. They're getting ready too. So it's that, like you said, teaching that perspective and being aware you're not the only one. They are very self-centered, very egotistical.
Yeah,
at this
and
age.
that's a theory of mind thing, right? It's whatever's in their head must also be in everyone else's head. So why aren't they helping me right now? One of the things with the social skills is I never just teach him one strategy of the ask for help. I always teach 3 or 4.
Okay.
And I usually the 4th, and you don't see it in this one, but it's the redirect your thoughts, do something else. And so the more you can teach a generalized response rather than just one response, the better for individuals who have those theory of mind or those perspective taking kind of challenges.
The tears were quickly after that, right? We had a
I
meltdown.
did what I wanted. I usually get reinforced for this. Why isn't it happening in this situation? What's different than all the others?
Yeah. And I didn't play into that because I think you said that earlier too. You don't want to reward that behavior. So I was very calm but firm, and I said, "This is fixable, but not right now."
Yeah.
I said, "I'm going to pick up your papers. I'm going to close the binder rings because they were broken. I'm going to put your papers in your zippered binder, and you can go to resource and get help. Not now, because everybody needs to leave, and I have another class coming in." So it was like, this is what we're going to do. Very methodical. No, I'm not rewarding yelling in my classroom or meltdown, right? No, this is done now.
And you kind of gave like an alternative thing to do. So next time this happens, I'm going to add that to your toolbox. You can ask for help, or you can close it and seek help from an adult, right? And even gave him kind of a, first you need to do this, and then go here and it'll be fixed,
Yes.
right? And so that helping them take perspective of when things are going to be okay.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
sometimes those situations that don't go well, we manage the best we can in those moments. But it's also after that moment happened, taking the time to sort of think that through and maybe try to identify the missing skill, which you were doing. You identified that student was able to ask for help, but not able to tolerate a delay to getting the help. Right? So there as soon as you've pinpointed that missing skill, then we can kind of think back to that behavior skills training model and how might we go back to providing those clear, concrete instructions of how to access those different tools in that moment, and practicing it when the stakes are not high is key as
Yes,
well.
Not as stressful
And that's
at
a
the
really
bell.
great example, actually. And so in the setback case, I would check in with the teacher or the parent or whoever I was working with and be like, so what were the setbacks this week? Great, we're going to bring those back into the rehearsals and we're going to work through them in there. What part of your strategies would have worked?
And I actually did have the opportunity because we had meet the teacher night, or I call it meet the creature night. And I sat with the parents and I told the story about the binder and asked that we could simplify things for this student because it was overwhelming. This was too much.
Right.
And the resource teacher and I worked as well collaboratively, and we check in.
Yeah.
We make sure that we're not So now we've got smaller binders. It's not a
Yeah.
giant zippered mess.
Yeah.
And so we are working, we're strategizing together, and I keep reinforcing with the student well before the bell. Let's start putting these things so we're working
absolutely.
on that. With
And
the
there's a lot,
positive.
and I hear a lot of like those really great preventative
Yeah.
strategies.
Mhm.
And if I were to be even come in, I would be like, okay, let's do a rehearsal when things don't go well, right? And then
Yeah.
that gets into more real life scenarios of let's tolerate this outside of those short-term preventative
I
strategies.
think I probably will have one almost every day with this young man.
Okay.
Today we had a meltdown because the descriptive trait that landed in front of us in this random game did not match him.
It's a setback. Yeah.
And we could not get away from that.
Yeah.
We couldn't leave that paper on our desk. It was not him.
I'm going to get kicked out. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, but we can continue the conversation. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.
Bye.
So for me,